Okay, so in this video, we're going to focus on peer reciprocal teaching, and there are two specific teaching methods that we'll be targeting. One is called the Jigsaw Classroom, and the second one is InterTeaching. So first, let's talk about what peer reciprocal teaching is in general. It is one of the most powerful ways for students to learn because what you're doing is you're getting students involved in the teaching of the content. And when we teach, that is a great way for us to learn. If you ask any faculty member, I can almost guarantee you that the subject matter that they teach, they know much better than subject matter within their discipline that they don't teach. And that is true even when you do presentations as a student. You end up becoming much more of an expert in that topic versus something that you may have just learned about and didn't have to actually teach others about. So you can see Major Harris and Zakrajsek talk about how you can really help your reciprocal teaching kind of have a good, important structure to it. And you can see here they've identified several different aspects. So first, you need to make sure that students are prepared to engage in this activity. Next, the students would then be sharing, what they're learning and synthesizing that together. So you're working it as a team, and this is where the reciprocalness is going to come in, because you are not just receiving, but you're going to take turns being the receiver and the giver of that content. And reflection is always an important part of the process as well. So you want to make sure that you build in reflection. I'm going to encourage you to go and dive into this chapter to really fully understand what peer reciprocal teaching is in general. And now we're going to turn our attention to the first method of peer reciprocal teaching. So Jigsaw Classroom has been around a long time and actually started in the K-12 world, but a lot of colleges are now starting to do this with the adult population as well. And there are lots of different ways that you can use the Jigsaw Classroom, but by and large what happens is you create a group. And I will tell you off the bat, one of the first mistakes that students or new teachers make even when they're trying this approach is they start to count off like 1, 2, 3, 4 to put people into groups. You don't want to do that. So the first home base group needs to be a cluster. So you need to decide how many expert topics are you going to ask the class to be diving into. Then however many expert topics there are, then you want to make sure you have groups of that size for your home base group. So for instance, let's pretend that you're going to have 4 expert topic levels. Content areas. Then what you would do is you would make sure you cluster. So you'd go around the class and you'd say, okay, the 4 of you are going to be a home base group, the 4 of you are going to be a home base group, and so on and so forth. Then each person in that home base group needs to identify with one of the expert topics that you put on the board or you put on your PowerPoint slide or you identified in some way. And then all of those home base group members, they leave and they go out to their expert groups now. So the groups shuffle a little bit. You start off in your home base group, you leave that, and you go now to another group. These expert groups can get larger, so what I often do is I'll break the expert groups into subgroups so that you don't have a giant conversation. You really want to keep group size manageable. I would say no more than 6 to 8. Otherwise, you might want to break it down into smaller numbers. If you start to get up to 10, it's probably better to split them off into 2 expert groups on the same topic than trying to have one large group. And the idea here is that students would then become expert on whatever topic it is that you're asking them to do. This might involve outside readings that they had to prepare for. It may involve in-class work, whatever it might be. And they have to be prepared to teach that content back to their home base group members. So at the end, they go back to the original group and they all get an opportunity to teach their group members. So again, let's just go through the process step by step. So the first thing you want to do as the professor is you want to identify what are the expert areas or topics. And that will depend on your class size, how many you choose. Let's say you have a really small class of maybe 10, you wouldn't have more than 2 or 3. If you have a larger class of 30, you might want to go up to 5 or 6 different topics. That's really up to you. One of the key issues in making sure that it is productive is you want to make sure that all of those expert assignments are very similar in terms of how long they will take, because you don't want one expert group to be done in just a minute or 2 and another one having to work for 30 minutes or even an hour, because then that other group's going to be off task. So they have to be very similar in terms of depth and time on task. Then again, you're going to group the students into the home-based groups, and as I said, you're going to do that through clusters. So you three together, you three together, you three together. You'll walk around the room and just kind of assign them to a home-based group. And then the members can decide on what area of expertise they want to be in. So you decide what those topics are, and then you ask the home-based group to decide, okay, who wants to do which topic? Then when they move into the expert group level, this is where the real learning takes place, because whatever your task is, again, it may be that they need to learn a part of a chapter. It may be that they're reading an external resource on this topic. It may be that they're going to find content to bring back to their home-based group members. Whatever the assignment is for that expert group, this is where they work together to try to learn that information. And they have to know it well enough to be able to bring it back to their initial home-based group. Now, it's during this part of the process that you as a professor really have to really work hard at this, because you need to make sure that all the expert groups are on the right track. What we don't want to have happen is wrong information being brought back to the home-based groups. So during this part of the class, which is the larger section of class, again, it may be 30 minutes or an hour even that you're spending on this part of the process. This is the bulk of the process. You want to make sure that everyone's got it, and not just one person in the group, but every single member, because they all are going to be held accountable for bringing that information back to their home-based group members. So one quick strategy that I always suggest when I'm going to check in on groups to see how they're progressing, what I used to do, and I think what a lot of faculty do, is they go over to a group and they say, "How's it going?" And almost always you're going to get, "It's going fine." You'll get kind of a thumbs up, and usually students just say fine. Once in a while, I get a student group who says, "We don't know what we're doing, we need help," but a lot of times they're just going to say it's fine. Well, that doesn't really let you know if it is truly fine. So instead, I usually go and I say, "Okay, what are the key points that you're bringing back to your home-based group?" And I might even ask different people in the group randomly to make sure that the entire group is on target and that they're all understanding it. It's essential that they understand that their home-based members are counting on them to bring that content to them. Now, once they get back to the home-based group, this is where you want the sharing to happen. So each member would then share it, and I usually, do a pretty defined amount of time that they know about ahead of time. So it might be 2 minutes, it might be 3 minutes, depending on how many groups you had. If you only have 3 groups, you could even do 5 minutes each. But if you had 6 groups, 5 minutes each, you have to remember it's going to take a half an hour. So you have to decide whether you have enough time for that. So you want them to teach the content to their group members, and the other members should be taking notes and learning that, asking questions if they don't understand. And usually after each member goes, I like to build in a kind of catch-up, time period. So let's say each member had 2 to 3 minutes, and then I might give an extra 3 to 5 minutes at the end for them to ask any questions of anyone and finish up in case someone didn't get to go through all their content. Now you can find ways to then, kind of have the next step happen. It might be that you want them to have a quiz on that content to hold them accountable. It might be that they have to work together to create a product. Lots of different ways that you can go with this. But again, if you're holding them accountable in some way, it kind of just ups the ante in terms of them being on task and paying attention and really invested in the learning process. Now, you don't have to stop there. You can certainly have this extend beyond class. So even after that home-based group, you could then give them additional assignments to maybe do independently after the Jigsaw Classroom experience, or for them to continue to work with that group beyond the class time experience. So lots of different ways where you might want them to make connections between what they were presented with in class and their readings or additional resources. You might want them to then do a mini presentation back to the class. Lots of different ways that you can get students to dive even deeper into the content. Now, there's a lot of research that supports this as being a very, very valuable tool. This method has been, really linked to improved academic performance. And one of the other benefits that I think we don't always think about, but I think we should, is the kind of the social elements really of the group process. And there's a lot of research that shows that not only are prejudices reduced, but also there's better attitudes towards peers. And this really stems from when you start to interact with people who are different from you. And that kind of naturally happens. You know, your home-based group might be people who are sitting near you, and that may be people who are similar to you. But then you're going out to the expert groups, and those groups are often, you know, from different parts of the classroom that maybe you haven't really connected with before. So a lot of positive benefits, and clearly if we go back to the what makes group work effective, it certainly has that interdependence. You need one another to get that expert content, and it has the accountability. There's no way for you to just go and sit in your group and not participate because you won't be able to bring back your expertise to your home-based group members. So very, very effective group strategy. Now here's another teaching method. This one's called InterTeaching. And InterTeaching was developed by Boyce and Heinlein, and it's kind of an interesting process. So what they do is they first developed this reading preparation guide. So when we talked, you know, previously in the semester about looking at how do we get students to read, one of the strategies we talked about was having a reading guide that can kind of provide questions to help focus students on the reading. Well, they start off by having this prep guide. Okay, so that is supposed to be completed before class. Then the beginning of class is then spent on a lecture, but this is a lecture that's based on how students did on this third part. So the very first class of the semester wouldn't have the clarifying lecture component to it, but every class thereafter would have this. And that clarifying lecture is based on these reading guides that are completed during class. So let me jump ahead to the last step so it makes a little more sense to you. So what Boyce and Heinlein are recommending is that students during class are partnered with another student to review their reading guide. So they did these, they answered their questions prior to coming to class. Now they're partnered up during class, and they are spending a lot of time going over the questions, and they have to put together, they have to document on a recording sheet, you know, what are the concepts that they were having trouble with, what are the concepts that they're understanding, and then the professor collects those or takes them electronically, however it works out, and uses those to create the clarifying lecture for the next class. So you can see here that the lectures are quite dynamic and responsive to students' needs instead of being canned and packaged, and that can be quite advantageous, a really powerful way to, you know, kind of customize and individualize your lectures. So basically what Boyce and Heinlein say is it's not necessary to lecture on something if they got it already from the text and their partner interactions. Instead, what you do is you focus really on the more difficult or challenging concepts. So what you can see here is just kind of this pie chart represents how class time is spent, and the majority of class is spent on the pair work, the partner work. So they're spending a lot of time interacting with the content and with their partner on whether or not they understand this. And then a smaller chunk of time is spent with the clarifying lecture that obviously is done by the faculty member. So what are some advantages of InterTeaching? Well, you know, first of all, you know, you're helping students get more out of the text because you're giving them those reading guides, and that can really increase reading comprehension. When we have kind of structure, that makes it more likely, you know, you're on a mission to find an answer to a question versus reading with no purpose. That kind of elevates your cognitive engagement and really can increase learning. And then, as I mentioned before, the lectures really are individualized. So they feel very meaningful to the class because they're on topics that the class has identified as being trouble spots. So usually students are pretty engaged in listening to your lectures because they want to kind of be clearer on what those topics are. And of course, you get to learn from teaching because it's interteaching. When you're in the partner relationship, it may be that one of you fully understands the answer to a question and the other doesn't. So that gives you an opportunity to teach your partner. So that reciprocal teaching element is really what also increases the learning that takes place. Okay, so that wraps this up. That gives you just kind of a brief introduction. So I hope that was helpful to you, and I'll look forward to our ongoing dialogue about it.